It all started with a moment no one in the church world expected. Bishop Noel Jones, a man known for his wisdom and calm spirit, stood before his congregation with an expression that showed the weight he carried in his heart. His voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the burden of what he was about to say. People who had gathered that day thought it would be another powerful sermon filled with hope and encouragement, but instead, they were met with words that would leave the entire church world stunned. With deep breaths between his sentences, Bishop Jones began to share that there were matters within the ministry world that had troubled him for a long time. He spoke in a tone that was not angry, not bitter, but heavy with truth. As he mentioned the name of Bishop T.D. Jakes and even his family, the congregation fell silent. The air in the room shifted, because everyone knew this was not just another message. It was the beginning of something that would echo far beyond those church walls. What made the announcement even more shocking was the way Bishop Jones spoke. He was not making wild accusations, nor was he attacking anyone in anger. Instead, he spoke with the weight of a man who had carried secrets for too long. He explained that the time had come to speak openly, not to destroy, but to reveal what had been hidden. His words painted a picture of struggles and truths that most people never imagined existed behind the polished image of one of the most respected families in ministry. For the members sitting in the church that day, their emotions shifted from disbelief to curiosity, and even fear of what would come next. Some people shook their heads, whispering in shock, while others leaned forward, almost unable to breathe, waiting to hear what else Bishop Jones was going to share. It was in that very moment that everyone realized this was not just another sermon. It was a turning point, a breaking of silence that would change the way people looked at T.D. Jakes, his family, and the bond between two powerful men of faith. Bishop Noel Jones had always been known for his deep wisdom and intellectual way of explaining the Word of God, while Bishop T.D. Jakes carried a fiery, motivational style that could lift the spirit of anyone listening. Together, their ministries complemented each other. Many people believed that their bond was unshakable, that nothing could come between them, because their friendship seemed to be rooted not only in ministry, but also in personal trust. Over the years, they celebrated each other's victories. Bishop Jones stood with Jakes during the growth of the Potter's House, watching it become one of the most influential churches in the nation. In return, T.D. Jakes supported Bishop Jones during his own challenges, lifting him up whenever he needed encouragement. To the outside world, it looked like a partnership built on loyalty and brotherhood, one that would last a lifetime. Because of this long history, the announcement from Bishop Jones carried even more weight. People could not understand how a man who once stood side by side with Jakes could now speak about hidden truths involving him and his family. It was almost unthinkable that someone who knew T.D. Jakes so personally, someone who had shared private conversations, prayers, and even family gatherings, would be the one to expose things that had been kept away from the public eye. This long bond of friendship made the church world even more unsettled. If a stranger had spoken, people might have ignored it. But this was Bishop Noel Jones, one of the closest people to Bishop Jakes, now choosing to reveal matters that no one expected. And that is what made his words echo so loudly across the Christian community, leaving many asking themselves what could have happened behind the scenes to break a friendship that had lasted for decades. Behind the smiles, the sermons, and the powerful public image, Bishop Noel Jones had been carrying silent struggles in his heart for a long time. From the outside, people only saw the friendship and unity between him and Bishop T.D. Jakes, but behind closed doors, Noel Jones had begun to notice things that troubled his spirit. These were not small disagreements or personal clashes, but patterns and behaviors that seemed to grow more concerning as the years went by. He observed how decisions were being made within the Jakes family that did not always align with the values they preached. At first, Bishop Jones kept these thoughts to himself, convincing his heart that no family is perfect and that everyone has their own private battles. But as time passed, those concerns became heavier. He could no longer ignore the difference between the image the world celebrated and the struggles he quietly saw behind the scenes. What made the situation harder for him was the deep bond of loyalty he shared with T.D. Jakes. Speaking up felt like betraying a brother, yet staying silent felt like betraying the truth. Many nights, Bishop Jones found himself awake, praying for wisdom, asking God whether he should remain silent or bring these matters to light. It was not an easy burden, because no one wants to be the voice that questions a family so respected, so admired, and so loved across the world. As time went on, these struggles began to weigh on his sermons. Those who listened closely could sometimes feel a heaviness in his words, as if he was wrestling with something unsaid. He continued to smile, continued to support his friend publicly, but deep inside, the tension grew stronger. It was like carrying a secret that refused to stay hidden. And though he never wanted to harm anyone, his conscience kept telling him that the truth, sooner or later, would have to be spoken. This silent battle inside Bishop Noel Jones became the foundation for the shocking announcement he eventually made. People thought his words came out suddenly, but in reality, they were the result of years of inner struggle, prayers, and sleepless nights. He did not expose T.D. Jakes and his family out of anger. He did it because he could no longer carry the weight of silence. For years, Bishop Noel Jones had carried his silent struggles quietly, hoping that prayer and patience would be enough to ease his burden. But then came a moment that changed everything, the turning point that made him realize silence was no longer an option. It happened in a private setting, away from the pulpit, where conversations were supposed to remain behind closed doors. Yet, what Noel Jones witnessed that day struck his spirit so deeply that he knew God was pressing him to speak. The incident was not about one small mistake or a family misunderstanding. It was about choices and actions that, in his eyes, threatened the integrity of ministry itself. He watched as personal decisions began to overshadow spiritual responsibilities. And for Bishop Jones, this was more than just a family matter. It was a matter of truth, faith, and accountability. In that moment, he realized that keeping silent would mean becoming part of the problem. That night, he went home with a heavy heart, unable to shake the images and words that replayed in his mind. He prayed earnestly, asking God for direction. He wrestled with questions that no leader ever wants to face. Do I protect the bond of friendship, or do I protect the integrity of the church? Do I stay quiet to keep peace, or do I speak out to keep the truth alive? These were not easy questions, but the more he prayed, the clearer the answer became. Bishop Noel Jones finally reached a place of surrender. He understood that his loyalty to God had to come before his loyalty to man, even if that man was someone he had loved and respected for decades. The decision broke his heart, but he also felt a strange peace, a peace that only comes when you know you are walking in obedience. From that day forward, Bishop Jones knew his path was set. He would no longer remain silent. He would no longer carry the burden in secret. The truth, no matter how painful, had to be spoken. This turning point became the beginning of the revelation that would shake the church world to its very core. When Bishop Noel Jones finally stood before his people to speak, the weight of years of silence pressed on every word he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes revealed the pain of a man who never wanted to reach this point. The church sat in silence, waiting, not knowing what truths were about to be uncovered. Then, with great care, he began to reveal what he had carried for so long. Bishop Jones spoke about how appearances can sometimes hide reality. He reminded the congregation that no leader, no matter how powerful, is beyond struggle. Slowly, he began to share what he had witnessed within Bishop T.D. Jakes' circle and family. He did not shout or accuse with anger. His words were calm, but they carried the sharpness of truth. He spoke of choices that contradicted the values preached on Sunday mornings, of patterns that showed a gap between public image and private reality. He explained that leadership is not only about sermons and stages, but about living in integrity when no one is watching. According to him, what he had seen was not simply a matter of mistakes, but of repeated decisions that risked misleading people who looked up to the Jakes family as an example of faith. He carefully painted a picture of a household admired by millions, yet facing struggles that could no longer stay hidden. What shocked people most was not the details themselves, but the fact that these words came from Noel Jones, a man known for his loyalty. If he was willing to speak openly, it meant the burden had truly become unbearable. His revelations were not filled with gossip, but with a deep concern for the future of the church. He made it clear that his decision was not to destroy a family. The congregation gasped quietly as they listened. Some had tears in their eyes, others shook their heads in disbelief, while many sat frozen, trying to process what they were hearing. For years, they had placed T.D. Jakes and his family on a pedestal, and now those perfect images were being shaken by the testimony of someone who knew them well. By the time Bishop Noel Jones finished speaking, the air in the sanctuary was heavy. The hidden issues were no longer hidden. What had been kept in private conversations was now laid bare before the public. And with that, the church world would never see things the same way again. The moment Bishop Noel Jones's words reached beyond the four walls of his church, the entire Christian community felt the impact. News spread quickly, not just through the congregation, but across social media platforms, online forums, and conversations in churches everywhere. People could hardly believe what they were hearing. Some were in shock, others in denial, and many felt torn between their love for T.D. Jakes and their respect for Noel Jones. Supporters of Bishop Jakes immediately came to his defense. They argued that no family was perfect and that Bishop Jones had gone too far by exposing matters that should have remained private. To them, this felt like betrayal, not brotherhood. They reminded others of the countless lives that T.D. Jakes had touched, the sermons that had inspired millions, and the legacy he had built over decades. They refused to let his name be tarnished without a fight. At the same time, there were many who stood firmly with Noel Jones. These people admired his courage and saw his words as a bold act of obedience to God. They believed that speaking the truth, even when it is painful, is part of a leader's responsibility. For them, Noel Jones was not tearing down the church but cleansing it, making sure that leaders remained accountable and true to their calling. This division created heated debates. Families argued at dinner tables, pastors discussed it in their pulpits, and believers all over the world took sides. Some felt that the church was being shaken for the better, while others worried it would only create more confusion and division among believers. Through it all, Bishop Noel Jones remained calm. He did not engage in public fights or respond to every criticism. Instead, he stood by his decision, repeating that his intention was not to destroy, but to bring truth into the light. Meanwhile, Bishop Jakes and his family faced a storm of public attention, their every move watched more closely than ever before. The church world had been shaken to its core. For years, people had looked to these two men as symbols of unity and strength. Now, that unity had cracked in front of everyone, leaving the future uncertain. And as the debates grew louder, one thing became clear: nothing in the Christian community would ever feel the same again. After Bishop Noel Jones's revelation, his own life and ministry were forever changed. The aftermath was not simple. It was filled with both heavy criticism and surprising support. On one side, many voices rose against him, calling him disloyal, divisive, and even accusing him of jealousy. People who once respected him began to distance themselves, questioning his motives and wondering why he chose to speak so openly about someone as respected as Bishop T.D. Jakes. Some leaders even refused to share a stage with him again, fearing the controversy that now followed his name. But on the other side, there were also believers who admired his boldness. They saw him as a man who chose truth over comfort, a leader who risked his own reputation to protect the purity of ministry. For them, Bishop Noel Jones became a symbol of courage, someone who proved that even in circles of great power, honesty should not be silenced. Messages of encouragement poured in from those who felt inspired by his stand, reminding him that not everyone had turned away. The backlash, however, was not easy to bear. Invitations to preach in certain places slowed down, friendships grew colder, and whispers followed him wherever he went. There were moments when he sat alone, wondering if he had made the right decision, asking himself if the price of truth had been too high. Yet in those quiet times, he also felt the peace of knowing he had followed his conscience. He reminded himself that obedience to God is often costly, and that true leadership is not about popularity but about responsibility. Slowly, Bishop Noel Jones began to redirect his ministry. He shifted his focus toward teaching about accountability, integrity, and the hidden struggles of leadership. His sermons became more personal, more raw, and many people who had felt disillusioned with church found healing in his honesty. While some doors had closed, new ones began to open, doors to people who were hungry for truth rather than polished appearances.